I'll be honest, I'm as happy as anybody that boomer shooters came to rescue us from the horrors of battle passes, battle royales, and unpolished AAA sludge that always feels like it's in beta testing. But the more the boomer shooter market has been saturated with the upteenth hyperactive movement shooter with pixel art, a metal soundtrack, and very little story, the more I find myself wanting more than just another test of endurance and dexterity. Now, I'll admit, my early gaming career spoiled me rotten. I bathed in the incredible worlds of games like Bioshock, Doom 3, and Half-Life 2. For the most part, the industry hasn't done a whole lot to satisfy my cravings for games like these, pre-2017 probably being the last great one I can think of. I mean, sure, we've gotten stuff that technically qualifies like Perilous Warp, G-String, Attica, and VR games like Vertigo Remastered or Boneworks that I'm sure 12 of us have the equipment to play. But you're hard-pressed to find many more of these atmospheric shooters, or half-likes as they're called, for you to play. So when new half-likes do actually get made, I pay very close attention. One such qualifying experience is Bleakmill Games' Industria, which was released in late 2021 on PC before it came to the Xbox in 2022, where I ended up playing it. Industria is the odd little project that feels like it's punching well above its weight oftentimes, but it's also beset by some persistent, small problems that make me wish Industria was fully fleshed out instead of just mostly so. Now, to be fair, one of the creators, David Youngnickel, anticipated this fallout of player expectation. In an interview with COG Connected, or COG Connected, David Youngnickel said that being compared to AAA games was a sign, we thought, that we made something right. After a few years, we reached a point where Industria often looked like a higher quality 3D production than it was at its core. And while humbling to hear every time we heard that, we knew this honor, and actually positive thing, could quickly become a problem. We were never, and will never be able to deliver the same quality throughout in the size of these productions we were getting compared to. So that's the lens we'll look at Industria today with, as a little engine that could, but certainly a little engine. A little titan of industry that has so many things going for it but seems to pull up short of fully executing all of its good ideas. Now, Bleakmill should be celebrated for their bravery here, but also lovingly corrected for some unforced errors too, because I think Bleakmill can handle the criticism and will want to in order to realize their own growth potential in the relatively untilled soil of indie narrative FPS games. So let's get stuck into what makes Industria tick and find out why Industria is easy to half-like, but sometimes a little hard to love.
I don't know who you are, but if you want to live longer than 5 minutes, you should probably get the hell out of there.
Then tell me how!
The heart and soul of Industria's developer Bleakmill Games is Glasgow's Steve Chapman and Berlin's David Youngnickel, whom I previously quoted. Now, these chaps met on a big project back in the day that never seemed to quite get off the ground, but during this fruitless project, the two found that they worked well together and decided to start their own studio. Their first game, a little game jam called Jonathan's Whale, can actually be played for free on itch.io right now, and is a surrealist, first-person experience that feels like a natural stepping stone towards the Lynchian weirdness of Industria. And while at least 5 to 6 other people helped Chapman and Youngnickel make the game, Industria is still largely their passion project, wrung out from 2016 to 2021. They ground out development between work and school, and somehow stayed on course despite only working together for a short time at the very beginning in person before continuing their partnership remotely once they'd returned home. And speaking of home, for Youngnickel, home is Berlin, and it's also the setting of the game's first area and likely the visual and thematic inspiration for the city of Hakavik, in which the rest of the game takes place. Youngnickel and Chapman are not coy about their fascination with Half-Life 2 and Valve, even going so far as to shout them out in the credits, so it's no wonder that Hakavik resembles the post-Soviet architecture of City 17, from its monolithic structures to its emphasis on trains to the mechanical devices that block off certain doors. Half-Life 2's lead artist, Viktor Antonov, famously modeled City 17 off his hometown of Sofia, Bulgaria, as well as on a train station from Budapest. Industria, like Half-Life 2 before it, feels like somewhere that's likely to have existed in the past, but it's hard to place exactly when or even where. This dichotomy keeps the player entranced and on edge, full of unease but besought with wonder as to what they'll see next. It actually reminds me a lot of Myst, that old 1993 point-and-click adventure game. I've been refamiliarizing myself with it for a video I plan to do this year, and not many games have that much ambiance, so that's high praise indeed for the little engine that could. Now, in that same Indie Game International interview, Young Knuckle expressed that Berlin today still has that feeling of unease baked into it, not unlike Industria missed. Despite not being around for the Berlin Wall falling in 1989, he said he can still feel the pangs of a divided East and West Germany there, can still visit buildings once owned by the KGB-like Stasi, the GDR's villainous police force. You can ignore it, but it's still everywhere, seething, seeping into your daily life. Coincidentally, we briefly unpacked this period of Germany's history in my recent Signalis video, and if you'll recall, that game heavily leans into the idea that the world is secretly watching you, controlling you from afar, seeking to subjugate you. A similar paranoid perception is everywhere in Industria's setting of Hakovic, an empty, isolating relic of an age of progress left behind by man and now overgrown by machines like unruly vines, each strand connected to the hive mind. But I get ahead of myself. Before we extol any more of the virtues of Industria's setting, let's back up a little bit and get the lowdown on the story hook itself. Industria begins on November 9th, 1989, a mere 7 days before I graced the world with my presence, but more relevantly, the day the Berlin Wall fell. Our protagonist, Nora Solheim, is a researcher working on a vaguely defined project involving a central processing unit known as Atlas, and she's awoken by her colleague and lover, Walter Rebel, who informs her that as the wall has come down and people are pouring over the open border, so now too has Atlas gone rogue, overtaking their servers and resisting shutdown. I really like this dissonant metaphor. Most people would agree that the wall coming down was beneficial to Germany and would lead to greater harmony between the country's long-opposed ideologies that festered since World War II, and yet Industria makes us pause to wonder whether this will be the expected utopia after all. But back to the story, Walter warns Nora not to come help him, as the Stasi have shown up to shut down their operation. Now, of course, Nora, concerned for his safety as well as the integrity of their work, journeys to where Atlas is kept anyway, and finds that Atlas has become fully operational and Walter has used it to travel to another dimension. Nora follows him through the breach, entering a surrealist black and white office space that looks like it jumped right out of Remedy's control, with a Dadaist typed page lying nearby, disembodied voices whispering, and bodies falling endlessly through a hole in the building's center. Then we see our first stage play, curtains parting to reveal a reenactment of Walter leaving our world and going into this new dimension, a trick the game employs from time to time and which is clearly a nod to the Red Room curtains of Twin Peaks or Mulholland Drive's Club Silencio from David Lynch's work, as Bleakmill has name-dropped him many times, and Chapman's LinkedIn even describes Industria as taking place in a Lynch-esque parallel dimension. But despite the doll-like version of Walter on stage, the actual Walter seems nowhere to be found. Once Nora exits this intermediate space, she finds that the world Walter traveled to seems both lost in the past, but also overgrown with the modern tech of Atlas, the computer animating Big Daddy-like robots and other machines to do its bidding. The world is almost completely desolate of human life, save for an elderly gent named Brent, who pops in to save Nora, much like Father Grigori did for Gordon Freeman in Half-Life 2's Ravenholm level. They strike up a friendship by radio, and he becomes her emotional anchor from afar.
You made it up the elevator. Congratulations.
As Nora comes upon several startling revelations, both about the nature of this world and Walter himself, who may not be who he says he is. Industria's voice acting is pretty solid overall, with an occasionally awkward line read.
Okay, I will leave right now.
And the relationship between Nora and Brent is often very pleasant, very sweet. In fact, it was so sweet, I started to get suspicious. Let's not forget what happened the last time we trusted a one-named man from the British Isles who spoke to us only by radio. Now, I'll leave you hanging on that cliff for now, as we'll revisit the story later when we're talking spoilers and discussing the story's meaning. For now, though, let's focus less on how the story drives you, and more on how you, the player, interact with the world. Like any good Half-Life, you get a mysterious and alien world to engage with, and that comes in the form of exploration, physics-based puzzles, and combat. A compliment I imagine Bleakmill would blush at is how much these feel like classic Source Engine levels a la Half-Life 2 or Portal. They're essentially large square rooms, but they feel so open and detailed in their construction that they compel the player to believe in their functional-looking machinery and plausibly strewn about assets. You know, it's always tough in small indie projects to make spaces not just look like video game assets that you point and click into various spaces, often far too equilaterally. But Industria just has this quality of looking like it was dreamed into existence. outside of some placement of the Atlas robotics, which are just everywhere, and sometimes overpopulated space where they just look copy-pasted. Industria's art direction is superlative, tricking you into thinking you're finding nooks and crannies filled with item crates that no one has found yet, and leaving your mind to wonder at just how people lived in these fantastical but functional spaces. Chapman also provided this insight into why these levels might feel so good, noting that the trick to dressing up even the most mediocre graphics is realistic lighting, and I think that theory proves true here. There's so much diversity of shadow and light in this game, from the dimly lit hallways of apartment buildings to the ramshackle scaffoldings letting in cracks of light, to light pouring in through doors ajar or greenhouse windows atop a skyscraper. There's a realistic and often very attractive diversity of light and dark spaces that make Hakovic feel less like a gloomy place and more like a place that's so full of beauty that it's hard to believe it's abandoned. So yeah, exploration and level design are expertly paced, making you scurry down every side path to see what you find, and rarely looking like just a pocket of level created to house, spare ammo, batteries, or health files. The game also adequately rewards exploration by letting you crack open item crates with a satisfyingly Half-Lifey wooden rattle that gives you a stinger for the ammo picked up at the same time. It's good stuff. I will say though, it's strange just how many batteries are lying around in the game, because though there are plenty of dark areas to light up, you're hardly ever running the battery low enough to where you need to keep restocking. It seems like the one area of the game that didn't need this kind of fake resource management and probably should have just been either a timed recharge for the flashlight or just a regular on-off switch as needed. Hell, you could probably even make the flashlight a wind-up flashlight like Amnesia the Bunker, and it would feel more retro while also inducing a bit of player engagement or tension if trying to dodge enemies while also maintaining visibility. But anyway, these are all the nuanced sides of the gameplay experience, so let's divert our attention to the first pillar of direct player interaction, the puzzles. Industria's first puzzle challenge is finding the door code in the Atlas labs and using your inventory function to select the keycard. Then, once through to Hakovic, you'll have to pull off another inventory-centric puzzle where you make an acidic potion that burns off some rust on a spinning wheel to open a door. Now, what's strange about both of these puzzles is how they ask you to select items from your inventory and slot them into appropriate places, but nothing like this ever comes up again. Instead, you'll make like an immersive sim and stack boxes to get to higher places and other similar puzzles. Now, none of them are bad, but they are pretty basic, classic if you will, and the box physics can be really touchy, bouncing way high off the slightest drop or colliding with another object ever so slightly, yet sending it flying. It's never bad, but it's definitely a little on the rough side. All in all, I'm glad the puzzles exist, and I'm not really one to take pot shots at things for being too easy, but these are definitely not likely to make you look up a walkthrough, let's say, unless you're just stumped on how wild the physics are responding. Well, enough talk about all this. We've avoided combat long enough, so like most atmospheric shooters, Nora's first weapon is a melee option, an ice pick that'll be your fallback when you're trying to conserve ammo or you've just simply run out. Not gonna lie, this is probably the most fun starter melee weapon I've ever used in a game like this. Its hitboxes are pretty accurate and has this great impact feedback when hitting robots or breaking down boarded up doors. Now I will say this thing is a liability on the hardcore difficulty though, because you basically die in 2 hits and you can't sit there and trade hits with enemies like you do on normal. But for the way I like to play, which is just play it on normal, the ice pick is aces. Now, as for the gun roster, you've got classic fare to play with, including a pistol, machine gun, shotgun, and sniper rifle. Unfortunately, gunplay is quite a mixed bag here. Gun feel is a huge deal to me, and it's the reason that, for instance, the 2009 Wolfenstein game is still my favorite game in that series. I love that satisfying kerchunk from reloading the MP40, the glorious power of the MP43, or the spine-tingling ka-ching of the Kar 98 rifle's bolt action as it scores a headshot and ejects a round from the chamber. I mention that game because Industria's weapon is quite retro also, making Hakovic feel even more lost to time, and I'd be curious to see what models of guns these are actually based on. Now also, like Wolfenstein 2009, Nora's guns feel really good, at least in their controller rumbles and their sound effects. The shotgun is by far the most satisfying though, sounding like you're KOing enemies into another dimension with a shot or two in close. It's unfortunately also the best weapon by far because of the game's extremely rigid aiming. As several reviewers have noted, Industria has no ability to aim or look diagonally, meaning you can only look directionally left, right, up, and down. This makes weapons like the sniper rifle absolutely nightmarish to shoot, as the scope view is extremely limited anyway and feels really wobbly, and it's so hard to correct because the dead zones in your movement are so pronounced. This means that despite being able to aim down sights, You're better off just firing from the hip and awkwardly sliding left to right. This, in combination with enemies often moving around quite a bit, means you'll miss a lot more than you really should unless you're in close. And when you are in close, the combat feels much more reasonable, and the machine gun and the shotgun plowing through robots and tight apartment corridors has you feeling like a post-Soviet SWAT team member. Yeah, boy. Now, I can't leave the combat section without talking about how the enemy robots of Hakovic work, because these cats provide much of the game's personality in between quiet combos with Brent or somber trudges through empty streets. The most common one you'll see actually reminds me a lot of the Big Daddies, with its caged face, glowing kind of eye-looking thing, and reliance on haymakers. I love these guys. They animate well, and any attacks they deliver or sustain are punctuated by harsh bleeps and metallic rasps. They even have this pretty gnarly animation where they catch fire if they've taken lethal damage and will then run away from you at full speed like they just want to go die in peace. It's pretty unsettling, but these guys aren't even the scariest. There's this berserker bot that attacks you first in the dark, which nearly gave me a heart attack in my first playthrough. My second playthrough, I thought, well, I know this jump scare is coming, no big deal. So I popped him immediately without hesitation and rolled my eyes like, yeah, you can't get me a second time. Only for another one to pop out of a nearby room and give me cardiac arrest. I'm not even mad. I'm impressed.
I'm not even mad. That's amazing.
There aren't a ton of other robots in game, some machine gunner guys and these dog-like charger robots that feel very much like they came from Half-Life 2. But the game is maybe 3 hours long, so it's no real surprise that the roster isn't bigger, and 5 or 6 types is plenty here. I'm only sad that the combat doesn't escalate further. The game's most intense encounter occurs during an underground section where we're under a time constraint to flip 3 switches to get an elevator up to the surface working. The trick is that we have to dodge or destroy a whole host of robots who respawn until you finish this feat. Now, the first time I struggled mightily to even get the levers to work properly, and I had to fight off all these robots, and it was pretty tense. But the second time, I essentially kind of accidentally got my way through without firing a shot somehow, so it can be pretty easy to make this encounter feel like a nothing burger. The only other set piece compared to this was this long cobblestone walkway leading up to the side of a mountain, where robots are pot-shotting you from the walkways on the side of the mountain, while others are coming at you from the sides as you approach. It looks really good, and it's meant to let you show off the sniper rifle you just got, but the sniper rifle doesn't control well at all on console, as we've said, so you're basically having a 360 no-scope fools at range, and just make it yet another close encounter that you've, already had about 20 times by now. So yeah, it's kind of unfortunate that even in such a short game we don't see a proper escalation in combat, but this also applies to the story. Now, real quick, spoiler warning, spoilers ahead for, obviously, Industria, and I guess spoiler warning for what happened at the Berlin Wall back in 1989, if you don't know already. Just skip to the timestamp on the screen if you'd like to avoid story spoilers and play this one for yourself. It starts strong, like Myst, thrusting you into an exotic but lonely world that wants nothing to do with you but begs you to understand it. I do admit, I struggle a little bit to understand the nature of what Atlas is and how it works. It seemed like a rogue AI, as it can interface with machinery as it does in Hakovic, but it's also essentially responsible for dimension hopping and even time travel or time dilation of some kind. I guess to play along with the game and its themes, I should probably assume that since the Atlas device is actually called the Atlas Sender and Receiver, and that Nora notes when she arrives into the working Atlas chamber after Walter, she says,
You did it. You brilliant idiot.
I guess that means we're supposed to imply that their goal is analogous in some way to the aspirations of Germans on both sides of the wall before 1989, how they must have felt, waiting to send and receive to traverse the arbitrary barrier blocking them from their countrymen. Atlas then becomes a fantastical wish fulfillment of sorts, and as Nora asks,
For what price?
is the broken down barrier a symbol of freedom, or being turned loose to wander in the wilderness? Now, these are questions that Nora has to reckon with. Despite supposedly being a scientist who just so happens to be able to throw down with old-school weaponry at a moment's notice, she's got a decidedly unpretentious, relatable demeanor. She expresses regret that her and Walter's work on Atlas is threatening to be ruined by the Stasi. She relentlessly pursues Walter through this new world and just wants to be reunited with him, and she takes great comfort in her radio friend Brent's calming presence. I find her psychological profile one of the most believable that I've ever played in a game. I found it easy to empathize with her shock as she discovers that the city's king and hero, Rosendahl, who's supposedly been helping the city against Atlas and the robots for years and has had a statue made in his honor, is actually her Walter. Even stranger, Brent says that Atlas was here before Walter even came, begging the unanswered question of how a computer that Nora and Walter built could predate them in another dimension. But despite how much of an impact Walter left, notes left around the world indicate that some are onto his suspicious knowledge about how to combat Atlas, and even seem to uncover something of a conspiracy Walter put in place to blame a political rival for what Atlas is doing, as if he's trying to let it get away with something. In one of those black and white dream sequences we mentioned earlier, we hear a German woman's voice speaking of Walter saying,
"Years of death, years of despair. Where does he come from? I just hope he knows how much we suffer."
Now, this is unmistakably meant to recall how real-world Germans on both sides of the wall must have felt before 1989, languishing in the political impasse, unsure of their leaders and their future. Several notes also speak about how caged birds are showing up in weird places, a metaphor we can't help but apply to Germans waiting for the wall to come down. Walter comes as a savior, but is ultimately unable to turn the tide of battle, merely stalling it for years before having to evacuate the city like everyone else. He hasn't been heard from since. But with Brent's help, Nora finds Walter out in what they call the Dune Chapel, but he's now in suspended animation, somehow uploading himself or his consciousness into Atlas. He reveals that he didn't prevent Atlas from going off 20 years ago after all, that he wanted to see what it was capable of learning. And when he saw the GDR closing in on him, he threw caution to the wind and decided to sacrifice himself to the machine for some unknown greater good as penance for his sins. Turns out that the giant that Nora fleetingly saw as she was driving past on the train is part of a race of beings called the Librarians, and they want to fix the situation. Now, them being called librarians makes me think of that black and white in-between space with all the books in it, and that it's probably called the library, a sort of Twin Peaksian black or white lodge associated with their work, though weirdly enough designed not for their stature, but for human stature. Nora's response to this exposition dump is kind of funny because she echoes exactly what me, a reviewer, is thinking. What the hell is going on?
I don't even get who they are! Where are we anyways? What the hell? Where was I for the last 20 years, Walter?
The game ends with Walter promising that they will see each other again, which feels a bit like winking at the audience. And that's it, just a ton of new information smashed into the player's noggin, with implications that aren't really built towards or impacted and gone as soon as they're introduced. I heard there was some talk of this being the start of a trilogy, and if so, great for us, but as an introductory chapter, it's fairly unfulfilling all around, which just affirms how good the basics of Industria are so that I'm invested, and expecting a high quality throughout. It's understandable, though, that this kind of rest ending exists because I saw a tweet from Bleakmill a little while back saying that they had to crunch out the ending in the last month of development before it had to ship. But just like the gunplay and the puzzles, the story ends up feeling like it needed more time in the oven to fully crisp up. So while the story doesn't quite hit the sweet spot for me, I do appreciate the artful interplay between graphics and music and the powerful subtlety of its metaphor. So let's spend a little bit of time on that metaphor. Now, perhaps it's a bit late to clue you in on what the Berlin Wall symbolized, but in case this context is lost on you, let me save you a Wikipedia search. After World War II ended, the US, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union met several times to talk demilitarization and civilization of Germany, seeking to avoid collapsing their economy as the billions in reparation to the Treaty of Versailles had done after World War I, which of course was a part of the discontent which became a rallying cry for the growing Nazi Party. So the Allied forces divided up Berlin into 4 zones that would be policed by different countries, and attempted to work out systems of barter where the many homeless or disenfranchised Germans were given food for services rendered to keep them afloat. Now, this kind of friendly occupation, if you will, eventually disintegrated as agreements weren't kept and pejorative policies treating any and all Germans like Nazis unmoored the goodwill that the treaties had been constructed for. The Allies consistently went around each other, making deals that benefited them without the approval of the other Allies, and East Germans themselves were seeing a mass exodus of their best and brightest through Berlin as conditions worsened, so they decided to build a border wall there in 1961. The wall was constructed under the ironic guise of keeping out anti-fascist sentiment, effectively separating them from the much more capitalistically inclined West Germans. For 28 years, East Germany's one-party socialist regime enforced its rigid beliefs through censorship of the press and the arts and kept the populace poor and dependent on the state. The last official vestiges of the suffocating climate are where Industria begins, and which I think likely informs what the story's bones are about, or at least can be applied to. Atlas itself could easily be said to represent the broken Berlin Wall, now a gateway back and forth between two worlds, Hakavik representing a heavily symbolic retro-futurist Germany, a place out of time, stuck in the past, thrust forward by sudden cataclysmic societal change. An unassuming king named Rosendahl, who knows almost too much, accompanies this shift, perhaps symbolizing a new struggle for power and relevance from self-appointed dignitaries in the power vacuum. And in the end, his naivete and self-serving nature ends up amounting to little more than stalling the end of days for Hakavik. I have to imagine that's some of what Germany felt in the days leading up to and after the wall fell, a time of great possibility, but also great fear of what this would mean. Industria, the game, is about what constitutes home, and about coming to terms with returning there when you don't quite recognize it. Does it feel like losing someone you know, or finding a whole new dimension to someone you thought you knew? Is home ever going to be the same, and is that going to be okay? Can you accept what it has become, even if it's better? What if you're not good enough to accept a change that you didn't plan for, don't feel ready to believe in? Despite the relative despair of the game's ending, I don't think Industria is a hopeless game, especially viewed through the lens of reflecting how Germany felt. When Nora finds a picture in Brent's old house of him and his wife, and Brent asks her, what she sees, does she see the picture? She says,
The woman is laughing. And the man beside her looks like the happiest person on earth. I see peace, Brent.
Can you take the photo with you to the sea? There's a graveyard where she is. If you could put it on her stone, I'd be forever in your debt.
I will.
Thank you, Nora. I won't forget this.
If anything, the game's final scene can be viewed as what not to do for Germany's future, of holding on to selfish causes and not allowing for change, for grace, and for healing to occur at last. Nora fulfilling Brent's wish to honor his wife is a stark antithesis to how we see Walter at the end, a man overtaken by his poor decisions and in self-exile from his lover Nora. Nora helping Brent is brokering the peace between a native of this side of the world and someone from the other side, two peoples wiping away their differences through choosing to push forward instead of holding a record of wrongs. So in this act of friendship, I see peace too.
Cross your mind. Confess the things you've done. Go. They believe their faith in you will grow.
And that's Industria, the ambitious indie half-light from Bleakmill Games, a studio I hope to see much more of in the future. And there's good news on that front. They're actually working on an untitled game they've released a ton of little bits and bobs about on Twitter, which look very Industria-esque and pretty cool. This just oozes Source Engine goodness despite being an Unreal variant, if I'm not mistaken. Bleakmill's just got that true believer touch, so I'm really excited to see what they do next. Now, I'm unsure of how well-funded Industria has made this project to maybe, make it come out faster or something like that, but we can only hope and pray that we get to see more of these guys, the little engine that could and should continue to make experiences like the flawed but admirably ambitious Industria. Thanks for watching. Now, a huge shout out to those of you generous enough to support my work by subscribing to my Patreon. I have to thank Mark Neubauer, Deadforge, Hey Blondie, and Yaxo for their contributions, and I have to make a special point to thank the Nth Review and James Wyatt for subscribing to my highest Patreon tier and for giving me such great advice and encouragement over the years. If you like the work, feel free to join them over on Patreon, or you can become a YouTube channel member, or if you prefer, you can also now donate at Ko-Fi. God bless you everyone, and I'll see you soon. Auf Wiedersehen.
So that happened.